Okay, welcome back again. So let's talk about developing renewal initiatives. And if you remember, when we talk about renewal, we're talking about transformational opportunities to exploit what might be good on the back of a disaster, or at least to put things right that need to be addressed urgently. And we're going to take you through two things: agreeing transformational initiatives together collectively as a partnership. And then we'll talk a little bit more in detail about how you identify challenges to renewal, and indeed how you might organise the delivery of renewal. So let's get on with it. So the first thing we're thinking about is, how do you come together to agree what renewal might look like? And we very much thought about a number of approaches, but bear in mind that we're thinking about engaging stakeholders, key stakeholders, in a thoughtful and consultative approach. And you can do that through a number of mechanisms. It might be a formal commission, it might be what we would call a renewal summit, and we'll come back to that a little bit later, or indeed a simple futures exercise where you come together to have a look forward to see what you can exploit from the disaster. But very simple aims to align partners on an agreed vision, a kind of shared narrative, if you like, a collective accountability as to steps forward, to co-produce with as many important stakeholders as possible a positive vision, a positive narrative about the lessons you might have learned from the disaster, and set ambition for longer term renewal of systems, be that people, places, or indeed processes that can now be improved on the back of experiences, and then engaging all partners, all necessary partners, on activities, on actions that they would need to come together to collaborate on in order to deliver that very simple vision. Duncan.
Yeah, but what status is these renewal initiatives take? Well, it might be that it's a single initiative, that's a single suite of actions that you want to implement, or that is part of a much wider program of change within your organization or within the communities that you serve. So these initiatives need to have strategy, resource, need to have governance around them. Again, as David said, they're ambitious, they're significant transformational change, and so they needed to be treated as such. And we need to think about outcomes. What are those outcomes, and who's accountable for that, and who's going to progress and push those forward? Because this is about change, there's going to be politics involved, and so who do you need to involve to support the process of identifying renewal initiatives? Who do you want get involved in co-producing those with you? So it might be that you'll get involved with leaders or elected officials. You'll get the executives of organisations. You might get members of the public or organisations that represent their interests involved in designing these renewal initiatives. And then who is going to invest? Who's going to fund and support with resource this? And so you might need to get those involved as well. There are various mechanics that sit around it. So we've talked about the information inputs to recovery planning in the previous module, and we'll talk a little bit about what the information is that might need to go into renewal initiatives. You need to think about how are these designed, how are they facilitated, and need to think about how are you actually going to support the participation of elected officials, of members of the public, of the organisations that represent different interests. And so it's about what are the mechanics that sit around designing these renewal strategies.
And some enablers that allow you to bring the right people together to have the right kind of discussion. So co-production by partners, we don't mean arm's length consultation. We mean, active seeking the views of, the opinions of, the input of people who might have been affected by the disaster, or indeed important to the way that it was managed. An exploration of the ambition to resolve competing views, if you like, about what transformation might look like into the future, and the ability to garner a bit of optimism, to align the renewal to some positive opportunities. It not just be about talking about the negative impacts of the particular disaster, or indeed the fatigue, if you look at COVID, for example, with a 2-year-long prolonged event and still ongoing. But also, the sharing of good practice. So to talk to each other about what good practice was enjoyed and how that might align into the future as well. And that kind of thoughtfulness, that bit we keep repeating, I think, and reminding both ourselves and you, that ability to take a little bit of time out to provoke some ideas, challenge yourselves about productivity, facilitating a wide-ranging, influential relationship with stakeholders, and then the arguments as to why you need to deliver the imperatives for change into the future. So a number of enablers, again, not exhaustive, but very important for getting people in the room to talk about the right things. This is the slide that will tell you a little bit more about what the agenda for that conversation might look like, Duncan.
Yeah, and so that agenda includes things around, well, what actually happened? What from the impact needs assessment, what from the lessons learned really points to some key learning from what has happened and what needs to be renewed. Identifying existing visions. So what existing strategies, what existing development programs or inequalities are known, and how are they going to be addressed through your renewal initiatives? Starting to think about the desired scale and the desired ambition for what renewal looks like. How much collaboration is ongoing, and what could that collaboration mean for renewal? What opportunities are there? So where are you going to get new stakeholders coming into working on renewal initiatives and other local strategies that are already going on, and how do they align with some of the opportunities that you've got to renew? And then really thinking through what those renewal opportunities are. So thinking about whether these are transformational, significant programs of change. And together, these 6 boxes outline the agenda, whether that agenda is the structure of a renewal strategy, whether it's an agenda for a meeting to start thinking about renewal. But really, this is the way, this slide we think is absolutely key in thinking about these 6 boxes and the story that renewal has through from the emergency as it happened right through to the renewal opportunities that you might want to take advantage, you might want to implement within your areas.
And as always, information drives the agenda, drives some of those conversations. So we've mentioned before to you the facts behind the crisis itself and the feeling of need for healing that you are aware of within the impacted communities, for example. The lessons learned exercise, the impact needs assessment are always and will always be central to any recovery renewal activities. And then that understanding, that unpicking of some of the local inequalities and some of the chronic problems that are always exacerbated by disasters, almost without fail. And then those opportunities that you can exploit to build resilience to future threats. So how do you future-proof local communities, businesses, the economy, services to be able to deal with the next impact, the next chaos, the next, the next disruption to normal life? And always, of course, what funding opportunities. Now, of course, it may be pre-existing funding, but it may additionally be the opportunity to come together to make more successful grant bidding, or indeed seeking future investment, or indeed just talking about how you could spend existing money more wisely in order to achieve these renewal initiatives. And then some of the wider priorities, the context of things like sustainable development goals, those broader pre-existing strategic priorities that we spoke about in previous modules can also importantly feed in to your information and your discussion of renewal initiatives. Duncan.
So we used this slide in module 4 around recovery strategies. And we said then that a recovery strategy could be on communities or economic, infrastructure, environment, health, governance. The difference with renewal is it's likely to cover bits of all of this. So instead of it just being about vulnerable people in communities, it's likely to be about vulnerable people and the economic implications and the infrastructure requirements and the environment. So there's ands in between all of these different areas. And really, again, this slide is really just trying to open your thinking up to what is the possibilities for renewal, what different parts of the system might need to be considered when we think about these big, challenging, transformational programs. And so this is not a prescriptive list of 6 things. It's very much an outline of different aspects that you might want to consider as part of a single program of effort. Very much like this slide, which is starting to say that transformational opportunities can lie in different places. They can lie in the people, the places, processes, and in the repair of the whole system. David, I wonder if you can just take us through people.
Sure. So we're talking about redesigning that offer that you have, service offer, to people that better match their new needs as a result of the disaster they've experienced. So, normal service provision faces the challenge of emergency, and we find it a little bit wanting. So what is that development that you can design in to improve life? Reconciliation with people, that collective healing, the renewed relationships we talked about previously around things like commemoration, particularly recognizing people lose during disasters. So, what do we know better today about those inequities, those losses, and how might we apply transformational opportunities accordingly? And reparations, literally, how do you compensate where appropriate those affected by crisis or make amends for their loss, I think is equally important. What if you talk about places, Duncan?
Sure, and here's thinking about how can places be used differently? What is their purpose? And how can we repurpose those places? Because we've seen during COVID, places take on a whole new meaning of what the outdoors means, how cafes and restaurants exist within a city. We can also think about relocating to different places, understanding that the needs of our customers, of service users has changed. And so we might need to move services to reflect that different people need those services, and so they need to move to where those new needs are. How do we regenerate places? How do we improve the growth, the prospects? How do we improve the strength of different places by regeneration and putting investment into those places? Processes are also important. So how do we reshape external environment? How do we change and influence the expectations of customers, of beneficiaries, so that they are receptive to the new processes that we have and they can operate within those processes? Or how do we need to reorganize existing processes, recognizing that there are external pressures, there's different ways of doing things, and that we might need to fundamentally change how some of our services are being delivered through the processes that we have. David, repair is repair of the whole system.
Yeah, I mean, we began by talking about redesigning the offer to people to match new needs. This is about recognizing that the way we were trying to meet old needs maybe didn't work quite so well. So this literally is about looking at maybe reconceptualizing how we do it, talking about the kind of value, the location, the ethics of delivery, what's broken, have we violated that contract with service users, and then just trying to make changes, be they broad or fundamental changes, to make sure that we put the system back up and running in a much more effective way.
And just before I hand over to David in the next slide, transformational opportunities are about working across these different areas. So it's not only necessarily about people, it's about people, places, processes, and working across those and the different challenges that they experience, but thinking about that as a program of different efforts that all come to bear on a particular issue that might need to be addressed. But we're not saying renewal is easy, of course not. Renewal, major transformation is considerably challenging. And there's various challenges that need to be thought about, David.
And I think addressing them, acknowledging them is the best way to start to deal with them. So we've suggested a number of, very much on the back of the COVID experience, but I suspect would be the same in any prolonged or wide area disaster. So the fact that you've got to, deal with the fact that people will have been responding over a long period of time and the impact of the intensity of crisis response on both the public itself, but also the resilience partners responsible for helping, recovering that, reflecting and learning, taking the time. That would be a difficult process on occasions, especially if it's felt that things might have been done differently. Right the way through to political challenges. They can be local challenges, they can be national. Indeed, as in COVID, they can be slightly global in the way that we could share information and learning with each other, for example. The most obvious ones on most occasions in this time and day, unfortunately, are always going to be financial pressures. But to repeat, renewal can often be around finding different ways to spend money, not necessarily always about generating new income. And the most important one, that, and again, why we keep on repeating that importance of taking a pause, a bit of time out, that impact of fatigue and the need to combat it and recognize that people will feel tiredness. There will be a degree of empathy fatigue after a prolonged event. And I think recognizing it and then dealing with it is the best way to meet that challenge as you move forward.
But one thing, David, we've found tremendous enthusiasm for renewal, that it's renewal that everybody really begins to lift their head up and think about the change that they could make to their places, to their people and so on. And that's really the exciting place that people can start to re-engage with this topic if they're not too fatigued.
I agree, Duncan. And it's mainly because recovery tends to be dealing with the immediate aftermath by nature. It can often be negative in tone, whereas renewal is a much more positive conversation, a much more forward-looking, a much more, you know, let's not allow this to happen again, and or let's make life better into the future. So I agree, absolutely, a much more engaging process.
And the last part of the international standard is clause 5.5, well, the last part under renewal. And here it's about agreeing an appropriate governance structure so that the renewal initiatives are delivered and are monitored and are project managed. We decided not to start telling you how to deliver such a governance structure, how to do program change, because that should be something that your organisations are already very comfortable with. But using whatever approach that you would normally use to create significant change and developing a government structure that enables that to happen. So by way of a summary, we have talked through some of the issues of these transformational change, the enthusiasm that can be built up, the need for a bit of a pause first. And David, we've been talking about it as renewal summits. We recognise that some places have created renewal strategies, but these are really big programmes of renewal initiatives.
Yeah, this, if you like, this could act as an aid memoir, I think, for everything you need to know about renewal on one single sheet. So very effectively reminding you about the basic concept of renewal, the kind of thing you ought to agree as an aligned vision for any initiatives within a local partnership, and then talk to you about both the enablers and also some of the moderations that will probably play out as you have some of those discussions. So again, I think we've covered them well in the previous slides, but a very handy one slide aid memoir, I think, that captures the essence of what we think renewal is all about.
And as we've done in previous modules, in module 5, we have some questions for you to think about in the green box in the bottom middle. Questions around, how do you create that shared ambition for renewal? Is it a renewal summit? Is it bringing everybody together in the way that David's just described, to have an open conversation about what is fundamentally broken and needs to be addressed in a transformational way? Should renewal be done individually? Probably not. Collectively, yes. Part of a strategic partnership. Well, which partnership? And how do you transition from recovery to renewal? And how do you maintain that enthusiasm moving forward? So just some of the questions that you might want to think about in RCG as you think through renewal. David.
That's us for this module. So look forward to seeing you on module 6. Thank you for listening.